Welcome to Lisa Does. I'm Lisa. Today I'm going to use some large-scale fabrics from my stash to make this quilt right here. I called it Blocks and Jacks, and the pattern is free and the cutting information is in the show notes. So come on, let's make it. Let's start by making 18 of block 1. We need 2/3 of a yard of each of our fabrics for block 1. I start by trimming off this edge. And I cut 3 6.5-inch wide strips of this fabric A. Next, I cut fabric B into 15 1.5-inch strips. Next, we make 3 strip sets by sewing fabric A strip to each side of the fabric B strips. Make sure you have a 1/4-inch seam. And our other side. Now that we have our strips sewn onto the edges of our wide strip, we can trim our strip set down to 6.5-inch pieces. We want to end up with 18 of these 6.5-inch pieces. What I'm doing to get this strip set straight is I'm lining it up on a line on my cutting mat, trimming the edge, and then lining my ruler up with the lines on the cutting mat to ensure that my ruler is straight. Now that we have our blocks cut, we can add the strip to the other edges. So we just put our strip in the machine, turn the block upside down, and sew. When we get to the end of our first block, we can feed our second block in just a little bit away from there so that we have room to trim them properly. And so on. Our blocks are sewn to our strip on one side, and now we can trim them apart. Now it's ready to press open. Your last strip is going to have a tail on it, and you just want to carefully trim that off. Use it for the other side of the block. Here we are with our 18 blocks. And since we don't have to match any seams with the other blocks, we can turn these whatever way we want. Next, we'll make 17 of block 2. Block 2 is an uneven 9 patch, and we'll need 3/4 of a yard of our darker fabric and 1 yard of our lighter fabric, which includes extra for our interior borders of our quilt. From our darker fabric, we're going to cut 2 4.5-inch strips and 3 2.5-inch strips. From our light fabric, we're going to cut 4 strips 2.5 inches wide and 3 strips 4.5 inches wide. From one of my 4.5-inch strips of light fabric, I cut 5.5 inches, and I'm going to set that along with my other 4.5-inch wide strips. And this one I will set aside. From one of my 2.5-inch dark fabric, I'm going to cut two 5.5-inch strips. And I can set this 2.5-inch strip aside. These three fabrics are going to make a little miniature strip set. We're also going to make another strip set with our other 4.5-inch wide light fabrics and 2.5-inch wide dark fabrics. Now we have our two long strip sets and our short strip set sewn together. We want to cut 34 2.5-inch wide pieces from our strip sets. Once we have all 34 of these units cut, we want to make two strip sets using our 4.5-inch with a 2.5-inch on either side. Now we have our last two strip sets done. We need to cut these into 4.5-inch pieces. Now count these until you have 17. You'll probably have one extra. What we're going to do is assemble 17 blocks like this. And since we've pressed all of our seam allowances to the dark, our seam allowances will all nest nicely. We can line these up and nest our seams. And our black should come together easily. We'll take this out, look at our seams, and they seem to line up pretty well. Then we can do the other side. And we'll continue going until we have 17 blocks. All of our blocks are finished and pressed, so now it's time to put them up on the design wall. Now let's get these sewn together. The way we'll do that is we're going to sew together 2 columns at a time. We'll start by taking these down and bringing them to the desk with our hand on the top. Then we'll do the same with the second column. Now that we have our column 1 here and our column 2 here, what we need to do next is take our first block from column 2 and flip it over onto column 1, and then we can sew it together. We just continue on putting the quilt block from column 2 over onto column 1. And we keep them attached even after we're done sewing. So just chain piece these through. Now that we have all of these blocks fed through and sewn together, we can add our blocks from column 3. Just to open them up and place our next block there, and they all stay in order because they're still attached. And now it's time for column 4. We pull our whole quilt down. We have these 3 columns sewn together and the rows are still attached, so everything is in order. We take our block from column 4, place it over column 3, and sew away. And now we're at column 5. We just keep on keeping on with the same thing that we were doing. Place our block face down over the column 4 block and sew. Now all of our blocks are sewn together in rows, and these rows are attached with the threads from our chain piecing. So everything is in order. Now all we have to do is sew these rows together. So we take our row 1 and we flip it over on top of row 2. So we're ready to sew our first 2 rows together. Place it under the needle, give it a start. I'm putting my machine into needle down position. As I get closer to the seam, I will snip the thread that's holding those 2 rows apart, adjust myself, and nest those seams. There we go. And we continue all the way down our row until the entire row is sewn. And now our first 2 rows are sewn together. We continue by flipping over the first 2 rows onto the 3rd row. And sewing those rows together. And we continue to do that until we have our entire top sewn. Here's the center of our quilt top. The next thing we do in order to cut our interior border is to measure from side to side. And we measure across the center in order to get the smallest measurement, because these corners are going to be stretched out a little bit. Now that our 1.5 inch borders on the top and bottom are added, we measure through the center of the quilt from top to bottom. And that is 57.5. So we'll cut the borders, the inside borders for our side at 57.5 by 1.5 inches. The inside border is now on my quilt, and I need to decide what to do for the outside border. I have this really cool fabric that matches this fabric right here, but it is directional, which means that if I want it to be right side up, I'm going to have to cut it the long way. So I will measure this and cut it to length, and then I will cut the width from end to end. Now that I have the side borders on, my quilt measures 54 inches from edge to edge. Since my fabric is only 40 inches wide, I'll have to piece it, and I'll choose to piece it about in the middle. And here's our finished quilt top, all ready for quilting. I hope you enjoyed today's quilting tutorial, and I hope to see you again soon. Like and subscribe for more quilting content. Thank you.